The observation dome of the ESS Heisenbridge always smelled faintly like burnt coffee and ozone. Elias Wren had no idea why. There hadn't been real coffee on board in 3 years, and the air filtration system was allegedly the best in Earth's outer orbit fleet. But still, there it was, roasted bitterness and lightning, like a barista in a thunderstorm. He leaned over the sensor array, staring at the blinking interface as if it owed him rent. The screen politely refused to offer anything new. Just the same radiation dips and quantum twitches that had haunted the edges of Sector 88B for weeks. Either we're looking at naturally occurring gravitational flux, he muttered, or some cosmic deities playing dice while drunk again. Careful, came a voice behind him. If the universe hears you, it might send another talking fungus to argue. Elias glanced up. Dr. Annika Morales, lead exobiologist in self-appointed morale assassin, stood with her arms crossed. Her silver ID tag gleamed like a badge of perpetual disapproval. No one's arguing with you, Annika. Yet. He closed the console with a sigh. Still nothing interesting, just the universe whispering sweet nothings and neutrinos. Annika handed him a tablet. Then you'll love this. You've been reassigned, effective immediately. He blinked. Reassigned? Why? Who did I offend? Wait, was it the experimental churro microwave incident? It's a diplomatic science mission to Velhara. Elias sat back, eyes wide. Velhara? That's the one with the aurora skies and weird birdfish, right? And the Velharians, humanoid, highly intelligent, peaceful, and they want a human specialist who understands deep space linguistic drift. Which I sort of do, Elias said slowly, if you count accidentally insulting a Martian ambassador with a mispronounced vowel as understanding. They asked for someone with academic curiosity and emotional restraint. He winced. They do know who they're getting, right? Annika handed him a second tablet. Apparently not. Shuttle leaves in 2 hours, pack light. 2 hours later, Elias found himself crammed into a shuttle pod the size of a generous coffin, surrounded by humming consoles and a flight AI named Juno, whose idea of calming passengers included unsolicited trivia about fatal space accidents. Fun fact, said Juno, chirpy as a caffeinated librarian. Over 93% of first contact missions involve at least one culturally catastrophic misunderstanding. Buckle up! Elias gritted his teeth and stared out the viewport. Velhara spun into view, a luminous marble swirled with blue and green veils, rings catching the light like a halo. The planet looked peaceful, deceptively so. He adjusted his collar, wondering if they had allergies on this planet. He was already sweating in anticipation of offending someone by sneezing during a sacred ritual. The landing bay on Velhara was oddly warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon, a welcome change from the thunder coffee ambiance of the Heisenbridge. Elias was greeted by 3 Velharian officials, all tall, draped in layers of glowing fabric, and sporting ears long enough to stir a breeze when they turned their heads. The middle one stepped forward. Her hair shimmered like polished obsidian, and her eyes were the pale violet of distant storms. She had an air of composed mischief, the kind you might expect from someone who knew all your secrets and found them slightly amusing. I am Silari, she said in unaccented galactic common. I will be your cultural liaison. Elias nodded too fast. Elias Wren, doctor technically, human, from Earth. Not great with rituals involving fire or seafood, but I try to be polite. She tilted her head. Your ears are delightfully small. Thanks. Yours are delightfully aerodynamic. Her expression twitched. A smile? A grimace? No, definitely a smile. The next few days unfolded like an awkward honeymoon between cultures. Elias was introduced to the Velharian language, a melodic mix of harmonics, pitch, and what felt suspiciously like emotional intent. He learned quickly that sarcasm did not translate well. During a formal dinner, he mistook a decorative bowl of glowing jelly for soup. After his third spoonful, the bowl hissed and tried to bite him. Silari had calmly extracted the meditative biogel, saying, "It feeds on anxiety. You may have over-seasoned it." One evening they stood beneath the twin moons, watching silken clouds ripple in slow spirals. "Do you know," Elias said, "on Earth we have a saying, Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. It's optimistic, until you realize stars are basically balls of plasma that'll incinerate you. Salari looked up. We have a similar phrase. Leap from the spire. You may grow wings by the time you fall. Better hope gravity's in a forgiving mood, Elias said, chuckling. She turned toward him then, the moon's glinting on the ridges of her ears. You laugh often. It's either that or scream into the void, he said, and the void doesn't usually answer back. Salari studied him for a long beat. Perhaps laughter is a form of armor, or a really terrible sword. Over the next week, they shared long hours in the Cultural Exchange archives. He helped decipher Earth's confusing idioms. She taught him the Velharian symbol for Elorante, the unspoken pull between two beings, like gravitational drift, but without Newton yelling in the background. The tension, if it could be called that, between them built not with thunderclaps, but in the quiet exchanges of glances, unfinished sentences, and a shared joke about the universal horror of group projects. One night, alone in the observation garden, Illis stood beside her, watching petals of a bioluminescent tree unfold in the slow spirals. She didn't speak. Neither did he. And then, under his breath, quieter than breath, he whispered, I wish I could marry her. He didn't know why he said it aloud. Maybe the stars had too much gravity tonight. Maybe the silence was too big. He assumed she hadn't heard. He was wrong. You know I heard you, right? Salari said the next morning, without preamble, while casually adjusting a floating hollow map of Velhara's southern continent. Elias, mid-sip of something green and allegedly nutritionally harmonious, choked hard enough to draw the concern of a passing avian-shaped cleaning drone, which hovered nearby with a metallic squawk. What? He coughed, barely clinging to composure. Salari didn't look at him. Last night, in the garden, your voice frequency fell just above the ambient resonance of the wind. Most wouldn't have noticed, but my ears are quite advanced. She flicked one meaningfully. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again. Okay, great. South right. The thing I said that sounded vaguely like a proposal and very much like someone who had been breathing too much alien pollen. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. She turned her violet eyes toward him, one brow arched like a question mark sculpted in amusement. Why? Because, he said, standing too quickly and bumping his head on the edge of the holomap, which now displayed a scenic beach and labeled it Danger, Amorphous Wave Fauna. Because it was a ridiculous thing to say, out loud, to an interstellar diplomat/linguist with ears that could pick up my heartbeat, apparently. So let's just backspace that moment from reality, yeah? Salari folded her arms. On Velhara, we don't erase moments, we interpret them. Right, Earth does that too, usually via therapists and expensive medication. Later, he fled the moment under the very reasonable pretense of examining a malfunctioning xenobotanical sample in the archives. The sample, a vine that hummed to itself and occasionally tried to braid nearby hair, was not helpful. It attempted to form a friendship bracelet with his shoelaces. Elias let it. His communicator pinged. It was a message from Gerald, the base AI. Gee, hello Dr. Wren. Would you like to discuss feelings? Gee, systems show increased cardiac activity and emotional volatility. Gee, should I alert a counselor or start a dramatic music playlist? Gee, I have options. Elias turned off the communicator with the exhausted grace of a man who had made peace with dying of awkwardness. That evening, the council invited him and Salari to participate in the harmonic soup ceremony. According to the orientation manual, it was a bonding ritual involving communal cooking, psychic resonance, and a delicate balance of flavors symbolizing the unity of soul frequencies. In practice, it involves sitting cross-legged on a glowing floor tile while bowls of levitating soup ingredients orbited them like culinary satellites. Salari explained that they must harmonize vocally to direct the ingredients into a central bowl. Failure would result in flavor dissonance, and if particularly bad, the soup refusing to be consumed. Does the soup gain sentience? Elias asked warily. Only on the solstice, she replied. They began. Salari hummed a note that sounded like the opening of a sunrise. Elias followed with something between a jazz riff and a hiccup. The garlic root cube immediately tried to escape orbit. Focus, she said, amused. I'm trying not to hit a note that translates to declare war. Okay? They harmonized again. This time the mushroom spun gracefully inward. The broth crystals followed. The pepper flakes refused, vibrating menacingly in place. You're off pitch, Salari said gently. Pepper hates me. It knows fear. Eventually, with only 2 minor explosions and a brief chase involving a rogue spice packet and a shrieking dignitary, their soup was declared chaotically balanced. They shared it from the same bowl, which Valharian tradition dictated sealed a moment as shared memory. Elias sipped, hesitated, then said, tastes like victory, stress, and maybe a hint of apology? Mostly lemongrass, Salari said. They sat together on a cushion afterward while the twin moons rose. Valarian laughter echoed across the terrace, light and bell-like. Salari looked at him. Your proposal? Oh no, we're not revisiting that again, are we? She tilted her head. We haven't even visited it properly once. He groaned. Do you know what happens if a human and a Valharian get married? Bureaucratic nightmares. Biocultural scandal. My mother emailing me hourly with questions like, is her hair edible? I assure you it's not. And I didn't mean it really. It was a moment. A weird, starlit, atmospheric, pressure-induced. Your voice had clarity, not haze. You meant it. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the calm certainty in her gaze, at the way her ear twitched when the wind changed direction, at the way her presence made the silence feel less like emptiness and more like waiting. I may have meant it, he admitted, almost too quietly. Then perhaps, she said, we should consider what meaning does. They were interrupted by Gerald's voice, piped through a nearby crystal pylon. Congratulations on your intensely awkward mutual confession. Would you like me to file a relationship commencement form? Gerald, shut up, Elias muttered. Filing now, Gerald replied cheerfully. Back in his quarters, Elias lay awake staring at the curved ceiling. Stars passed overhead through the translucent dome like unhurried thoughts. He wondered what it would mean, really mean, to love someone from another world. Not the theory, not the academic possibility, but the reality. The snoring in 2 languages, the arguments over thermostat settings that controlled humidity instead of temperature, the shared silence that spoke louder than all the mess between them. He whispered again, softer than before. I wish I could marry her. But this time, he knew she had heard. The interstellar meeting chamber smelled faintly of citrus and the tension of 17 overlapping political agendas. Elias sat at one end of a crystalline table that seemed far too long and entirely too reflective for comfort. His reflection kept making eye contact with him, like it knew what he'd whispered under the moons. On the opposite end sat Commander Tessa Price of Earth's Cultural Preservation and Expansion Division. She wore her uniform like it was vacuum-sealed to her personality, sharp, unbending, and possibly machine-washable. We've reviewed your personal log, she said, specifically your statement from 3 nights ago. Elias raised an eyebrow. You're spying on my garden mumblings now? It was transmitted through the linguistic surveillance net you agreed to upon arrival. I thought that was for learning Valharian verb tenses, not for broadcasting my romantic breakdowns. Price didn't blink. You told an alien diplomat you wished to marry her. Technically, I whispered it to the air. The air had ears. They weren't my fault. Behind her, a holoscreen displayed a slowly looping video of him and Salari mid-soup ceremony. At one point, he appeared to be attempting to sing harmony while simultaneously sneezing. You understand this creates complications, she said. Diplomatic entanglements, biocultural resonance risks, genetic incompatibility concerns. And let me guess, Elias cut in. It looks bad on the quarterly report? Price scowled. It looks like interference. The Valharians are negotiating entry into the Galactic Accord. We're trying not to look like emotionally compromised colonizers. While that's ironic, given our track record, you're to limit all further interactions with Salari to professional exchange only. He leaned back, arms folded. So no soup. Got it. Back at the Velharian research atrium, Elias arrived to find Silari perched atop an iridescent data pillar, legs folded, sipping from a flask that glowed faintly green. She looked down at him like he was mildly unexpected but welcome, like finding an old note in a book you meant to reread. "You look harassed," she said. "I'm being bureaucratically exercised. Do you require ritual cleansing?" "I think I require a flamethrower and maybe a lawyer." She slid down the pillar with a surprising amount of grace for someone wearing a robe made entirely of folded solar silk. The fabric shifted colors depending on the angle, like mood lighting with opinions. "They're afraid of what we represent," she said. "Two people having a weirdly intense soup date? Connection without protocol. It threatens their narrative. They said I'm not allowed to see you anymore, unless it's for professional reasons." She thought for a moment. "Then let's build something. Something scientific, something inconvenient." That was how they ended up collaborating on a resonance drift interpolation matrix, which sounded important enough to keep Price's goons away, but vague enough to avoid actual work. In truth, it was an excuse to map the emotional harmonics of Velharian flora, specifically a plant called Therix bloom that glowed brighter the closer two individuals' heart rates aligned. Naturally, the first bloom they tested exploded. "It's a compliment," Silari said, brushing pollen off her sleeve. "Exploding flowers are compliments here? It means the resonance was too intense, like two notes striking the same pitch too perfectly. It overwhelmed the bloom." "I've overwhelmed a flower. I don't know whether to be flattered or report myself to Botany Affairs." Later, while examining a sample of sentient moss that hummed lullabies when petted, Elias sat cross-legged and asked, "Do your people really care who you bond with?" Silari tilted her head. "Not as much as they care about why we bond. And if the why is stupidly simple, like just liking how someone thinks, or laughs at their own terrible jokes." She was quiet for a while, tracing a fingertip along the moss's pulsing edge. "Then it is a rare bond. Rarer than compatible DNA." They sat in companionable silence, broken only by the moss attempting to harmonize with Elias's stomach. It failed. That evening, while reviewing data logs, Elias received a secure message from Gerald, the base AI. "G, I have detected anomalous diplomatic traffic on the secure channels. G, interstellar accord negotiations include Clause 17 trillium. G, Clause 17 states that cultural contamination from emotional attachment nullifies non-aggression pacts. G, in short, they're trying to make you a technicality." Elias read it twice. Then he read it again, while quietly eating a Velharian snack that looked like a grape and tasted like a small lie. He forwarded the message to Silari. She responded by appearing in his lab 5 minutes later, holding a ceremonial petition orb. "They want me to declare our connection a non-binding incident," she said flatly, "to preserve neutrality." He stared at the orb, which pulsed like it was breathing. "That sounds like the galaxy's way of saying, this never happened." "If I refuse on us," she said, "Valhara might be excluded from protection zones, trade rights, defense grids. And if you accept," she smiled grimly, "you'll go back to Earth. I'll go back to pretending none of this ever touched me." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're just two people who harmonized over soup. How is that a diplomatic threat?" "Because it means something." She looked away. "And meaning frightens those who survive by pretending everything is negotiable." They stood together in the atrium, surrounded by humming moss, sapient vines, and a flower that exploded again in the corner, this time for no reason at all. Elias whispered, "I don't want this to be a footnote." "Then write something louder," Silari said. She took his hand, and in the luminous quiet, the resonance bloom between them began to glow. It didn't explode. Not this time. Elias had never been on trial before, but he was fairly certain most legal proceedings didn't involve interpretive dance, telepathic frogs, or a court stenographer who wrote verdicts in holographic calligraphy across the ceiling. Then again, most courts weren't run by the Intergalactic Accord Tribunal of Sentient Affairs, a governing body so ancient and bureaucratically tangled that its own bylaws had footnotes referencing parallel dimensions. He adjusted his translator pin for the third time and leaned toward Silari. "Tell me again how challenging the treaty clause through theatrical arbitration isn't a joke?" It's very serious, she whispered. Mockery of the process results in a mandatory poetic retelling by the accused. That's not reassuring. The judge, a translucent being composed of what appeared to be both mist and enthusiasm, floated to the center of the amphitheater. We now begin the duel of interpretations. You will present your argument via an approved artistic medium. This tribunal recognizes interpretive narrative, stylized oration, kinetic performance, and controlled hallucination. Choose your format. Elias stepped forward. I'll take stylized oration, and possibly regret. The judge twirled once in midair. Very well. You may begin your narrative rebuttal. Please stay within the temporal limit and refrain from emotional weaponization. Elias glanced at Sayalari, who gave him a small nod. He cleared his throat. So, you're all here wondering how a human astrophysicist and a Valharian diplomat managed to destabilize a treaty that took 6 years and at least 14 species to draft. And the answer is soup. Polite murmurs echoed across the chamber. One of the frogs blinked very slowly. See? I didn't come here to fall in love with anyone. I came to study gravity waves and possibly embarrass myself with alien etiquette, which, mission accomplished, by the way. But Sayalari, she taught me things about frequency and silence and what it means to truly listen. Our connection wasn't sabotage. It wasn't political. It was planetary. It was two people resonating across cultures, across biology, across the terrifying awkwardness of feelings. He paused, then added, also, I once accidentally serenaded a sentient shrub, just to set the bar for embarrassing acts. The frog raised a flipper in approval. And when I whispered something I never meant for anyone to hear, because I didn't think I was allowed to want that much, she heard me, not just with those extraordinary ears of hers, but with intention, and she chose to respond, not out of protocol, but because it meant something. That meaning isn't contamination, it's evolution. He stepped back, slightly breathless. The tribunal allowed Sayalari to take her place beside him. She looked every bit the diplomat she was born to be, except for the faint smile that tugged at her lips as she began. I offer kinetic performance, she said. Elias blinked. You what now? But Sayalari was already moving, slow, fluid motions that painted stories in the air. Valharian dance was more than gesture. It was a language of vibration and intent. As she moved, images flickered into life, glowing threads of memory and emotion unfolding in holographic ribbons. There was their first awkward meeting, reimagined with slightly exaggerated expressions. Elias flailing backward from a floating chair. Salari deadpan and unamused. The soup ceremony, hilariously overdramatic. A bowl that levitated like a holy relic, mushrooms dancing around it like celebrants. Elias's animated counterpart dramatically choking on spice. And the garden, the moment under the twin moons. Her turning toward his whisper, rendered as a blooming resonance that pulsed outward like a shockwave made of light. The chamber was utterly silent when she finished. Then Gerald's voice rang out from the Earth delegation's hover console. If this were a musical, I would be weeping. Commander Price stood abruptly. This is highly irregular. The clause in question, the judge shimmered and spoke. The clause in question relies on the premise that emotional entanglement results in destabilization. But we have seen no destabilization, only resonance. We rule to amend the clause. Emotional connection shall not be considered contamination when built on mutual respect and interspecies understanding. Elias exhaled for the first time in what felt like 100 years. So, we're not intergalactic criminals? Not today, Salari said. Tomorrow remains flexible. After the proceedings, the chamber slowly emptied, leaving behind faint sense of ozone, victory, and someone's leftover snack pack that was apparently alive. Elias and Salari stood near a column inscribed with tribunal history. I still can't believe the tribunal allowed that dance, he said. It was either that or I challenged them to a pun duel. You made the right choice. Gerald pinged him again. G, I have updated your relationship status to symbolic ambassadorial union. G, would you like matching jumpsuits? G, I have designs. Elias turned to Sayalari. So now what? We go back to making exploding flowers? We could, she said, thoughtful. Or we could try to redefine first contact. With a second date? With a marriage proposal that doesn't rely on whispered accidents? Elias grinned. You want me to do it properly? Or improperly with flair? I've grown fond of your style. In the starlit atrium later that night, Elias dropped to one knee. Not entirely by choice. A moss sprout had tripped him, but he stayed there anyway. Scifi, will you marry me? On purpose this time? She knelt with him, their foreheads touching. My answer, she said, is still yes. The wedding was scheduled precisely 3 galactic standard weeks after the tribunal ruling, which, as it turned out, was just enough time for Elias to panic 12 times, be fitted for a ceremonial jumpsuit made of smart fabric that kept trying to sing, and accidentally agree to adopt a pet that might also be a low-level deity. He was told repeatedly that Valharian wedding customs were simple. This was a lie. At last count, the ceremony involved 7 symbolic knots, 2 resonance loops, a vow sung in overlapping harmonics, and something called a sky glide of acceptance, which turned out to be a synchronized, zero-gravity flight maneuver performed above a bed of bioluminescent seaweed. Elias practiced for a week and still couldn't do it without a squeaky yelp. I thought simplicity was a cultural virtue, he muttered during rehearsal. It is, Scifi said, guiding him through another twirl. This is us being extremely minimalist. On the day itself, the Valharian ceremonial ring floated 10 meters above the capital's tallest tower, encircled by slow-orbiting drones projecting archival footage of their story, heavily stylized, of course. One drone featured Elias accidentally hugging a fern, animated for comedic effect. Another looped the moment Scifi caught the soup bowl before it exploded. Your mother's arrived, Gerald announced in his ear. She brought a casserole. It contains ingredients that may not be legally recognized in this system. I'm sure it's fine, Elias muttered, unless it tries to mate with something. It already has. Scifi wore a ceremonial mantle that shimmered in tune with her heartbeat. Elias's smart suit tried to match its rhythm and failed adorably. They stood beneath the central resonance bloom, now permanently glowing and vibrating softly, the literal symbol of their bond. The officiant was a former Valharian war mediator with a fondness for pop culture references and an unshakable belief that true love required legal disclaimers. He began with a joke about subspace relationships and concluded by offering them a clause-free union with optional neural sync upgrades. When it was time for the vows, Scifi spoke first. You walked into my world like a cosmic error, loud, confused, poorly dressed. You stayed because you listened. You stayed because you asked questions no one else did. You made meaning where others saw inconvenience. Elias looked at her, at the way her ears framed her face like wings, and said, You're the only one who ever made silence feel like conversation. You taught me that maybe, just maybe, I'm not too weird to be understood, even if I still think the soup tried to kill me. There was applause. Also, a brief moment where the wind lifted Elias's jumpsuit hood over his head mid-kiss. He decided to pretend it was intentional. Afterward, the reception took place in a floating garden where gravity behaved like a polite suggestion. Earth's delegation mingled nervously with Valharian elders. Elias's mother interrogated a diplomat about Valharian child-rearing customs while feeding the casserole to a curious sentient fern. Gerald projected a holographic slideshow titled Moments That Technically Led to a Wedding, which included highlights such as accidental proposal, soup diplomacy, and legal precedents set by romance. He ended it with a heartfelt slide that simply read, Love equals good. As the stars turned above and the moons crossed paths in a rare eclipse event, Elias and Scifi drifted in the sky glide, held aloft by low-grav fields and laughter. Around them, light shimmered. Petals fell from the resonance bloom, and someone's pet pocket beast tried to steal a canapé. He looked at her and whispered, So, this is real. She nodded. This is choice, made and remade, without whispers. Do you think we broke the universe a little? I think we bent it gently. Years later, their story became part of the official curriculum on interspecies diplomacy. Young cadets were taught not only how to avoid insulting alien fungi, but also how to recognize the harmonics of connection. On Earth, a small statue was erected of Elias attempting to propose while tripping over a flower. It was strangely popular. As for Elias and Scifi, they continued their work, translating frequencies, mapping emotion-based communication, and occasionally being interrupted by Gerald with dramatic updates about their adopted pet god declaring itself mayor of a sandbox colony. They never did agree on what flavor the soup had been that day, but every time they heard someone whisper something they thought wasn't meant to be heard, they smiled. Because sometimes the quietest words become the loudest truths.